Hello and welcome to the Super Feelers podcast. My name is Laurie and I'm joined by Dave, Heather, Kat, and Shannon yet again for our next DBT skills episode. So for those of you who are just jumping in at this point, we're going through the book DBT for Life by Dana Partington as a bit of a guide to help us talk through new DBT skills every week. We've all done DBT for a variety of years. So I think from the most 10-ish years to 3-ish years of having DBT kind of in our lives. And we all have lived or live with borderline personality disorder. And we're all members of the Super Feelers Club, which is the peer support group that kind of goes along with this podcast. But just for context, this is not a recording of the peer support group because my dad thought it was for some reason. And he's like, wow, that's weird. And I was like, no, this is different. So it's not that. And none of us are clinicians, so this is all just us talking about our use of skills from our lived experience. So we are coming to the end of this book, which is kind of unbelievable. So we're talking about distress tolerance skills. So this is Unit 4 of Dialectical Behavior Therapy. There's 4 units of the therapy. These skills are about how to get through crises and distress without making things worse, and then being able to essentially use your skills to get through the hardest parts, let that wave pass, and then be able to be more skillful in life as you move forward. So just quickly introducing the chapter, she talks about how a lot of the Buddhist psychology really informs dialectical behavior therapy, and this kind of concept of pain happens, but suffering is optional. Which of course is minimalistic, I guess it's a way to word it. Of course, suffering sometimes is not optional, but the fact that there are skills that we can use to diminish the suffering and that it can make it at least manageable until we can do something else. Yeah, so she talks a little bit in this just intro to this chapter about distress tolerance versus emotion regulation. So 2 different things, but obviously very goes hand in hand. So if you haven't listened to the emotion regulation components of this chapter of this book or series, I would definitely recommend you go do that. But emotion regulation in my head is daily life regulating my emotions and then hoping that I never get to that crisis point. And then distress tolerance is once I'm in that more crisis point, being able to come back to a more of whatever quote unquote baseline there is. Does anybody else have a different take on what distress tolerance is as a concept?
I think it's kind of interesting because I came to DBT when I was really struggling. And so one of the things that I did through that is make a crisis kit. And that comes with me everywhere. It's either in my rucksack that I have or it's in the car. And just having that there is really reassuring. And that helps with the emotion regulation because I know I have what I need. So that, yeah, like you say, goes hand in hand.
Yeah, it helps with anxiety too, right? Because you're not oh my God, what if something happens and I'm not prepared? It's well, I'm prepared, so here we are. Also, rucksack's a funny word. Just I have to say that out loud.
What do you? I really like it.
The word or distress tolerance?
Yes.
The word,
no,
yeah.
I really like the word rucksack and I want one now. I don't know what it is.
It's a backpack, right?
Okay. Oh yeah. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, we don't use that word. But it's great. I love it. It seems so old school. The other thing that I liked is she says in here distress tolerance skills help us recover enough to access our wise mind and our other skills. And that is such an important way to think about distress tolerance, and I think why I needed distress tolerance so bad when I started dialectical behavior therapy, because I was just in constant crisis and my life was a disaster and there was nothing that could be done productively to deal with things if I were still in this constant crisis state, right? You can't possibly rationalize what's happening in the world when your life is just completely thrown upside down. Yeah, I thought that was helpful. All right. So let's move into the first skill of this unit, which is radical acceptance. And for those of you who have listened to either this podcast or my last podcast, you'll know that I love this skill. Although early in this series, I don't remember what episode it is, but Dave schooled me on on explaining radical acceptance wrong. And I don't remember what episode it was, but it was one of these. And I was like, Dave, this is my favorite skill. And you just totally told me I do it wrong. So it'll be interesting to talk through, because like, I don't even care if I do it wrong. It was so meaningful to me and still is, that I'm okay with however wrong I'm doing it. But before we dive into it, Shannon, do you want to kind of overview the story that came up in this unit?
Yeah, so this one started off with a story about Jenny, and she was in a house fire. Her little cat came and clawed at her face and woke her up, and she had a roommate, so she was able to grab the cat and wake the roommate up, and they got outside just as the house really kind of, the windows smashed out and everything that they owned and cared about burnt to the ground. So as Jenny moved on after the fire and her, dealing with just all of the things that happen, like accommodation and insurance and all of those things that make dealing with a crisis so hard, that paperwork stuff, I've got a lot to say about that later on as we go. But and she was having conversations with her therapist around accepting that this is what has happened and there is literally nothing she can do to change that. So, people were dropping things off and there was lots of kindness around her, but she seemed to struggle with some of the injustice in it as well. Like the landlord obviously hadn't checked on the fire alarms because they didn't go off. So as she started to, these feelings were coming up and she explores throughout this story, and it is really kind of watching her journey of being able to accept that this has happened while validating her feelings around how tough it was and the things that she had experienced, and teaching herself that when she started to go down the track that was going to increase her suffering by saying things like, this isn't fair, why did this happen to me, training her mind to come back to that space of radical acceptance and noticing how that lessened the level of suffering she was experiencing in an already really tough situation.
Thanks for that great summary, Shannon. I'm going to put Dave on the spot.
Sure.
And I'm going to ask...
Sorry, by the way, I hope I can actually say that.
No, this was literally like 7 months ago, and I still think it's hilarious. So I'm not offended at all. It was just very funny. And it's recorded somewhere. I know it's in an episode because when I edited it, I laughed. So I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you to describe what you feel like radical acceptance means, like a summary of the skill.
Yeah, again, I'm so sorry. The only thing I can say is that, I think it comes from a place. I think that I can be a little militant about radical acceptance. And it comes from a place of, for me, feeling like it's the skill that if I didn't do anything else from DBT, it's the one that's made the most difference in my life and that really unlocked my ability to do other skills and to interact with them. And I think I feel sad, and it's hard for me when I hear so many people, when radical acceptance comes up, both in a DBT context and then also just out in the world, and people say, I can't do radical acceptance, I hate radical acceptance, I don't understand radical acceptance, I don't like it. It just, it bothers me. And it also bothers me because I think that, and so, I think it bothers me because I feel like there's a fundamental misunderstanding, not by you, but a fundamental.
I'm gonna have to pull back the tapes. It's gonna be very entertaining and very hard to edit. But yes, continue. Editing Laurie here and pulling the tapes.
I don't want to get ahead of ourselves because I'm sure that at some point it's a chapter in here, but
I'm not sure that let's move on is actually part of radical acceptance. I think that's one thing that makes it hard for people to grasp radical acceptance and use it, is that it's, in some ways, it really is just exactly what it's just a different side of describe. It's like, you're just being super realistic about like what exactly happened. And I'm not like deluding myself like, well, maybe this really happened, or maybe what I know happened didn't actually happen. It's more, which I guess is exactly what we're talking about here, is like, what specifically did I observe happening? Without any sugarcoating, without any judgments, without any opinions, without any generalizations.
I can't believe I just got schooled on radical acceptance. But
I feel
you're probably right.
I feel very passionate about, particularly because most people, they say that they're really struggling with it, and it's because of this exact issue. Is because of the word acceptance and the way it's usually used in our culture. They think that part of it is, and I have to move on from something that was like painful or traumatic. And once you sort of recognize that that's not part of it, it gets a lot easier, I think, to use the skill. I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding about radical acceptance and what it is, that I just have this reflex to just jump in and like, I guess, correct people when they talk about radical acceptance, because I think that even for people who say they're into it, there's always baked into it into the word acceptance, some sort of like being okay with it, or being happy about it, or learning to like it. And I think it comes again from how we use the word acceptance, at least in the United States and our culture, in particular around things like, oh, my parents accept me for being gay or something. You know what I mean? Which indicates not just sort of like they tolerate me, but like, like they're like happy about it, or they treat me like they're happy about it. Which, it's one meaning of acceptance, but I think here I would just suggest changing it to radical reality, because the idea is, for me, the idea is just looking at exactly what's going on right now and aligning my thoughts and my actions to fit with exactly what's going on right now, right? So if and this is a totally hypothetical, but like if my mom has been a drunk my entire life, and is, even when she starts off nice during a visit, she inevitably becomes mean, acting as if there's a chance that this visit it'll be different, or acting as if this visit, when she's starting to get mean, it's my fault, is denying reality. And again, it doesn't dictate what you have to do about it, and it certainly doesn't mean I have to learn to be happy about my mom treating me this way. But it does mean when I say, okay, this is coming up, she wants me to visit, what am I going to do about it? The one thing I'm not going to do is I'm going to act like anything else is true right now, other than that she is a drunk and she is going to be mean, and so. And it's also, I mean, I think that there is not baked into it in some cases, like in this story where there's a fire, like obviously you can't bring back the things that were burned. On the other hand, just because my mom is a drunk right now and is mean, again, hypothetical, it doesn't mean that she will be a month from now, a year from now, 5 years from now. It's, and again, look, maybe she will be, the chances are good that she is. But it's really, I think, to me, the skill is really about, in this moment, right now, what is the truth, and how am I going to act or think, based on an acceptance that is sermon done.
Well said. Love the radical reality piece of it. I think that's a super interesting reframe of that. I'm gonna talk about really quick why radical acceptance means so much to me. And I think it's because of when I was doing dialectical behavior therapy the first time. So for context, for those of you who don't know a lot about my story, I was a kid who had lots of mental illness, clearly. And I had a lot of issues with anger and violence. And I beat the shit out of my family on a regular basis. And I am not happy about that. and I will never be. And I will always acknowledge that like that was very wrong and nobody deserves to be treated like that. And also, if we're going to be dialectic about this, I was a child with very undiagnosed mental illness and was not getting treated in the way that I needed to because I was not from my parents' lack of trying, because the system isn't working and because I was not diagnosed with the thing that was actually wrong with me until I was an adult. So when I was first going through DBT, I had just recently been kicked out of my house by police because of an incident of violence, which, fair enough, families deserve to be safe, and I was not giving them a safe environment to live. And my family had essentially written me off as like, she's an angry, violent person. And I was trying desperately to heal my own shit and had this like judgment of others that I was trying to deal with as well, and the guilt of what I had done. And so, and for reference, like it's been over half of my life, like 15 plus years, and I still don't have a relationship with some of these people because they think I'm an angry, violent person. And so when I was doing DBT and I learned radical acceptance, and it was about like, this is reality now, and I can't change, in my opinion, in my view, it's like, I can't change the past. This is the reality that I'm in now. And I need to be able to cope with this reality and move forward in a way that is different and healthier and better. And so whether or not I'm necessarily like to the book, like, here it says like accepting reality as it is when it can't be changed, doesn't mean liking or approving reality, but it means deeply accepting that there's a reality in this current moment, even if you don't like it, and not ignoring or denying reality. And so the way that I looked at this when I desperately needed it was, the reality is I did bad things. The reality is also I did bad things due to a lack of ability to cope and skills and treatment. And I cannot change what I had done in the past. Therefore, I need to be sitting in this DBT group and go, okay, I'm going to move on from this horrible thing that I did many times, going to move on and just try and change the reality that I have control over now. So again, I don't like, potentially not like the best description of what it means of radical acceptance in like a general concept, but that's why it was so transformational for me. So I'm curious if that resonates with anyone.
Laurie, can I just real quickly, I mean, what you just described is exactly what I was, I mean, that's dead on exactly how I picture radical acceptance.
Okay. Look at that. Maybe I'm going to pull back the tapes and be like, oh shit, Dave was right. No, but I mean, and also maybe I just explained it badly in that moment, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's how you just explained it now. That's exactly how I picture radical acceptance. That's
okay.
supposed to work.
Cool. Hey, look at that. Okay, awesome. And Dave, I love you. I'm just making fun of you because it's entertaining. I'm not. You are one of my favorite human beings on this earth. And thoughts from anyone?
I think it's going to look different, like looking at depending on what situation you're applying it to. So while the principle is the same for everything, depending on what you're applying it to is going to make it just shift a little bit. I think it's a skill that's malleable to be able to apply it to all different situations. And I think that's why it's so magic. But just before I let you guys go on, it was the hardest skill for me to get my head around. I remember when this was first introduced to me and I was like, what is this mythical bullshit wizardry that they're trying to sell to me? And then when I started to look at it a little bit more, I felt like by participating in radical acceptance, I was giving away all of my power. I had to just get on board with every shit thing that had happened. And when I first went to DBT, there was a lot of stuff going on. One of my kids had experienced significant trauma. And I was like, how am I going to get on board with radically accepting this shit that should have never happened and is not okay? And I'm not going to be able to accept this. I'm a world away from there now. But I think it's a hard one to grasp, and it changes based on each experience and where you're using it.
I totally agree. And I've heard that from others in the past of like, it's slightly different than your experience, but in my experience, I was the aggressor of the example where radical acceptance was the primary, like, this is where the light bulb clicked for me. For you, it was somebody that you loved that had gone through a traumatic experience. And for others that I've heard are just like, I'm never going to accept this, are people who have, gone through experiences of like sexual abuse or something like that as children. And they're like, I cannot accept this. And I think that's, Dave, where your radical reality is almost better wording, because none of us should accept any of this that happened. But it's accepting that it did, I think, is the difference, as opposed to that it was okay. So Shannon, I'm curious how you got from like, screw you with your magic telling me to accept all this shit that went down, to where you are now, which sounds like you do value this skill and that it's important in your life.
I love this skill, and it was understanding the difference between willingness and willfulness. And I was all kinds of willful. I just didn't want to let that stuff go. But that understanding that really helped. So for me and that situation, I could accept that had occurred, because reality is it did occur. There is no amount of kicking or screaming or crying that is going to change that situation. And the crux of this skill is, by accepting the things that you cannot change, you are lessening your personal suffering, so you can then focus and pour yourself into the things that you do have control over. And you can do that from a place of using your wise mind, rather than this place of reactivity and pain, and a place where you are more likely to make poor decisions that's going to increase the level of suffering. So it wasn't until I kind of just committed to having a go at it, and that I seen the difference that it made for me. And again, I had to break it down into little steps. I couldn't just I couldn't just go, yes, I'm going to be willing and I'm going to put myself out here and I'm just going to radically accept all of the things. I had to break it down into small parts that I could say, yes, this part I can accept. I can accept that this happened. And by doing that, I'm not saying it was right. I'm not saying it was fair. I'm not saying that it wasn't traumatic, that it hasn't had a huge impact. I'm saying that this part has happened and there is nothing I can do about it. And so I'm going to accept that. And then I can then break down the next part and the next part and the next part and see where I'm getting stuck in those little spots. And it always came back to, am I willing to do this, or am I actually just in my own head of being a bit of a brat and being quite willful about it?
Before we move on, can you explain the difference between willingness and willfulness? Because I think that's important.
So in my understanding, willingness is being open to the possibility that this could make a difference if I give it a try. And being willful is closing yourself off to the possibility that it could make any difference at all. And I was in that camp. This isn't going to work for me. And man, once I got on board, it made a huge difference. And in that specific situation, it increased my capability to be able to support the person who I cared about, who was going through this thing, in a much healthier way, which lessened not only my suffering, but also his. So it was this really great thing that once I could get on board with it and get my head around it, it made a big difference to not just my life, but everyone around me's.
Yeah, thank you so much. Heather, do you use this skill? What does it look like for you?
Well, first of all, the way Shannon explained it kind of reminded me that it really goes hand in hand with distress tolerance. But like 9 months ago, I started journaling, and radical acceptance was the first thing I tried to journal about. And I was the person that would have pissed Dave off because I'm only going to read the first sentence, but literally I wrote radical acceptance, scribbled it out, and said, fuck that. I don't accept any of this. I never had a chance. And so, like, I really just misunderstood what the skill meant. I thought it was like, suck it up, buttercup, basically. Like, you have BPD, deal with it. Like, like, the word acceptance really does play such a big part in that. I would love if we changed the name. We should do it. But it's radical reality, truly. I use it a lot now that I understand what it means, but I used to really fight against it. Kind of like Shannon was explaining too, just like, I'm not going to accept these shitty things that happen to me and say they're okay. But I've learned that it really isn't. That's not what you're doing. You're just trying, like, suffering optional. You don't have to dig your own grave even bigger by not accepting that this is what's happening. Because I know there's so many things in life that I've been through where I'm like, I'm just going to like lay down and not be a person and make this thing so much worse, exasperate all these problems instead of realize this is where I'm at and I have to live with this, whether I am going to choose to make it harder on myself or not is the real issue at hand.
The fact that you were able to pull up that journal right now is so
I brought it
awesome.
with me because we were doing radical acceptance. Because I think it's so funny. It's my first journal entry and it's just like, no, fuck you.
No, it's so, but like, how invalidating does it feel?
It does. Like, I was pissed when I heard of radical acceptance. I was like, you got me fucked up. I'll never do that. I was the other side of radical not accepting it.
Yeah, radical denial. Yeah. But I get it, right? Like, you know, am I accepting that, like, I maybe I shouldn't give the example I'm going to give, but like, am I accepting that, like, my parent didn't love me? Yes and no, right? Like, I'm accepting, like, okay, well, that's what happened, but I don't like it. I'm not happy about it. And I totally get your, like, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, like, suck it up.
That's all I heard.
Type of, yeah. And I think that's such an important point. I think so many people hear that. And that's not what they're getting at, but sometimes it's just not described very well.
I just felt like the way Dave explained about having like an alcoholic mother or something like that, like I have an addict parent. And for so many years, I've just found myself in the same situation with him, like something's going to happen differently. And my husband's like, you know, this is what's going to happen. And I still every time would just be like, we're going to pretend he's not a crackhead and everything will be fine. And then it's not. And finally, over the past few years, before I even knew what this skill was, I started really being like, okay, this is what's going to happen. This is what he is. How am I going to deal with it? Instead of just being like, it's not happening. It'll be different this time. And that has really made all the difference. Like, he can't hurt me with that anymore because I was blaming me.
Absolutely.
It really plays into the coping ahead, the ability to be able to cope ahead when you can radically accept, I'm going to put myself in this space. It is going to be as it's always been. This is the reality of this situation. It's going to be tough, but then it gives you the capability to go, how am I going to handle this? If you are honest about the likely outcome in that situation, you can kind of plan ahead on how that's going to look for you or set boundaries around, I want no part of it. But I don't think you can do either of those things, cope ahead or set boundaries, without being able to do radical acceptance well first.
Kat, what does this look like in your life?
I think I've been reminded kind of as you're talking about, I first heard about the whole suffering optional kind of idea at like a Buddhist monastery that I spent a lot of my childhood at. And it was a comment that I guess it comes to kind of like willfulness is like somebody hurts you and then you hold a hot coal and expect them to be burned, but actually you're only hurting yourself. And then like there's another two quotes that I love that I want tattooed, which are like, all we have is now for the rest of our lives, and you can only change the person that you become. And this all kind of reminds me of that. I think there's like a process for me, like it's all tied in with validation. So like I'm coming from that kind of sexual abuse kind of angle. So it's mostly around triggers. So it'll be like validating why I'm triggered and why that's okay, but also why it's not relevant now in reality. And that's where it kind of really helps for me to unpick that of like, yes, obviously I'm really scared, but actually this situation is like, so it kind of comes, and then like you say, then I can go into like opposite action and cope ahead from there. I like opposite, yeah. Really kind of powerful.
Yeah, both you and Heather brought up like how this does really connect with distress tolerance. And I, for some reason, never really connected. Like I've never really thought of radical acceptance being part of distress tolerance unit, because it seems like it's like a overarching skill almost. Like I guess they all kind of start connecting. But Kat, I'm just curious. This is just me being nosy now. You spent a lot of your childhood at a Buddhist monastery. What?
Yeah.
What? Tell us more.
It was actually the first Buddhist monastery in Europe. So a lot of the first kind of lamas and rinpoches who came out of Tibet ended up in London. And then somebody who knew them through London gave them like what used to be a hunting lodge just up the road from where I'm from. And then my dad's a joiner. So in the summer on the holidays, I would go with him. And there was a special monk, Yandak, who I would go and change like all the butter lamps. So there's like 100 butter lamps that are set for all the Buddhas in the temple, and you change them every morning. And then there's little offering bowls of like water and wheat and rice and stuff, and we would change all of those together. And then like he taught me to meditate and stuff.
That's so random and so cool. And like, this is so off topic, did that make learning mindfulness in DBT easier?
Yeah, because like a lot of that is meditation, but a lot of it is mindfulness. Like Akong Rinpoche, who started that monastery, used to say like mindfulness is just being aware of what is now. So like, you're doing it all the time. Also, like it does come into the radical acceptance as well, because it's a Buddhist practice called metta or power meditation, which is also in DBT, where you think of somebody that you love, and then yourself, and then somebody that you would be having a bit of an issue with, and you kind of work up to like all living beings and like wishing loving kindness upon everybody. And that kind of links into radical acceptance, because I remember when I was first doing it, I was like, well, there's a lot of people I ain't sending no loving kindness to. And like it took a long time, but yeah, I kind of got the jump on that because I started when I was like 8 or 9. I'm really grateful for that.
So cool. No kidding. I can't imagine. I see very different than like learning from like literally Buddhist teachings in a monastery like down the road from your house. But I see my nieces and nephews who are like 5, and they like are learning about breathing and yoga, and I'm just like, can you imagine how different your life would be if you learned about breathing and yoga when you were 5 years old? Oh my God. It would change everything. I love this skill, and I really appreciated her options to responding to a painful situation page in this book, page 247.
That was very clear. I liked it.
Yeah, I love a visual. I mean, it's a lot of text, but I love a list. So she has 5 different options for responding to a painful situation. And the first is change the situation. So, if you don't like your job, get a new one. Change your perspective. This is a little bit more of like it's all going to be okay. Like almost like toxic positivity sometimes, like make lemonade out of lemons, like look for the silver lining. So, there's that. Sometimes that works for people. Radical acceptance. Accept something all the way, move forward by figuring out how to live a life in the current reality, make changes based on the reality you've accepted, and remember that accepting doesn't mean that you condone the situation or support it. Staying miserable, option 4. Keep fighting reality is part of that, stay miserable, or make the situation worse. And that's where the denying reality comes in. And Shannon, I feel like maybe that was part of your experience of just like, this cannot be accepted. Not so much this cannot be reality, because it doesn't sound like you were denying the fact that it was reality, but with that came denying the fact that it was acceptance, or denying the fact that it could be accepted. And then did it make it worse or easier?
It absolutely made it worse because I had no way around it. But as I started to understand that accepting that it had occurred and that this is what we were facing didn't mean that I was accepting what had been done or that it was right or that I should excuse that behavior. I could still hold all of those boundaries because you can imagine with having justice as one of my core values, that it was a difficult situation to navigate, and it just made it worse because before I was able to accept that this is where we are now and this is what this looks like for us. Yeah, once I accepted this is where we are and this is what this is going to look like for us, it didn't matter how angry I was about it, it still looked the same. And the angrier I got, the harder it got because I couldn't come at it from a place of a place of making rational choices because I was just so mad. And so being able to shift that perspective, I wasn't just mad, I was miserable too. I remember when I read through this and I looked at those two, I was like, oh yeah, that's just maybe where you put willfulness in number 4 and number 5. Willfulness. It's that I didn't know how to get out of my own head around it. And that was I'm not going to say it was a great one. It was a tough one to start coming at radical acceptance with. Now I can just do it, and it's quite easy, and it happens a lot. Sometimes I have to challenge myself still, but it definitely, being able to accept it made it easier to manage. And now that I can look back on that situation, my capability to accept it and get into that better frame of mind meant that I helped in that situation in a really excellent, thorough, thoughtful way that has lasting consequences. And I'm really proud of that. If I had stayed there in that this is wrong and it's bad and I'm mad about this and I should be allowed to rage because this friggin' sucks, and that's valid.
Yeah,
I'm not
100%.
taking away that feeling. It's a valid feeling, but I would have never been able to support everybody else through it. And by accepting it, I was able to do that, and it made a big difference for everybody, including me.
I don't think that it's not being mad, right? It's you can be mad and be like, and this is how it is, right? Because I mean, I even think like politically, like there's a lot to be fucking mad about, but it is what it is. We can't go back and change the votes, but we can try and do something about it now.
Yeah, I think definitely once I divorced acceptance from approval, that kind of was a kind of shift change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I had a realization while we were talking about this that I was only able to get sober because of radical acceptance, that I was an alcoholic. So that's really meaningful to me. And I'm just realizing ways that, I thought I always hated this skill, but really I've been using it. It's been benefiting me always.
I know you just said, like, you just came to that realization, so this might be difficult to, like, talk out. But do you want to talk about a little bit, like, what you mean by that's how you got sober?
Well, okay, so, and I imagine this is very typical, but, I was in denial that I was an alcoholic for a long time. And it's just like, no, like, I don't need it like that. Like, I was not living in reality about it. I was able to be like, well, I'll just do it like once or twice a week, even though I'd be getting like blackout, shit face, like still abusing alcohol. But I'm like, well, that's not alcoholism because I'm not drinking every day. And just all these unrealistic things. I was just in denial. And it took just being like, okay, this is where I'm truly at. This is how this is affecting me and my family. And this is radical reality. That's what I'm going to start.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm super glad that you were able to kind of come to terms with that, and also that this conversation helped retroactively be like, oh yeah, I guess I do this.
Right, and in a super important one. I just realized it became way more meaningful to me during this conversation.
Awesome.
Can I add, Laurie, when you talked about change your perspective, the lemons, I have huge issues with the toxic positivity stuff, but there is this little thing that I found, and I may have spoke to you about it before, where I talk about where we sail down our river of shit and collect the little pieces of gold along the way. Being able to practice radical acceptance enables me to, even in really, really hard things, be able to appreciate that this is how it is, but find the good things that we're doing inside of it. I'm just going to use my family as an example. There's some stuff going on with my kids at the moment, and it's caused some big upheavals for all of us. And in that, I'm watching them set boundaries, respect the boundaries that each other have set, acknowledge at the same time the dialectics that while this feels like this for me, it is happening because the people around me care about me. So if I just was consumed that this is a really big, tough situation and it's hurting all the people that I love and I'm finding this really, really hard to deal with, I wouldn't see that stuff. But because I can accept it for what it is and it's an experience and we're working our way through it, I'm able to find these little pieces where I go, oh my God, look at us doing really hard things in a really positive way. And this is my older kids, so they're in their early 20s. I had to wait till I was 40 to understand this shit. And here they are as young adults. And then my 11-year-old son is watching all of the adults around him behaving in this way where we can acknowledge that this big, hard thing, which is big and hard, we are doing it in a really healthy way. And so while I don't buy into the toxic positivity, make lemons out of lemonade stuff, I can, because of radical acceptance, notice these really beautiful things. And in those times where it is really tough, I can say, hey guys, we're doing this really fucking well. Sorry, I probably should have sworn. We are doing this really, really well.
I swear literally all the time, you're fine.
And that is great. That is around the changing perspective part without just trying to put a pretty picture on something. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had a weird self-criticism in the last couple of weeks about toxic positivity, actually, because I'm like, I think that maybe my take on super feeler, how sometimes these are beautiful things that are great, might be super invalidating for people who are in the shit of it, in the worst possible part. They're like, fuck you, nothing about this is great. So I've been grappling with that. I have no conclusion, because I'm literally just grappling with it in the present moment. But I love the it's not just putting a pretty picture on a pile of shit, because it's, I think a lot of us, I don't want to overgeneralize. I can speak for myself. That was my childhood. Is everything's fine. Look at how nice of a family we are. Everything's great. And then in the background, there's literal trash cans on fire or whatever.
Oh.
And how invalidating is that to be you just have to pretend you're fine.
I was just going to say it's so true, because when I first started listening to your original podcast, I would get a little irked when you would be like, I love having BPD. I would never change it. And I'm like, I would kill 3 people. Not really, but it was that strong that I'm like, I would go through fire for this. I'm like, yeah, I would. But now it's only a year later, and I wouldn't trade it for the world, because now that I can manage some of my symptoms, I'm freaking cool and awesome. And like, I wouldn't be nearly as like excited about things that other people don't get excited about. I wouldn't be as funny as I am. And, you know, like it just really makes, like, I wouldn't be me without it. So no, I wouldn't take it away now.
Thanks, Heather. I really appreciate your honesty there, because that means the world to me. Like, and I know you're not the only person that feels that way, but to hear it from somebody that I like care about so much, and like, yeah, that means a lot. Thank you.
I think that's
Can I give the opposite perspective to that too?
You're like, I still hate Laurie. She's the worst.
No, that is not the opposite perspective, not the angle I'm coming from. But for me, listening to that original stuff and those original podcasts when I was deep in the pile of shit, I kept thinking, oh, I want to feel like that. I want to feel like they do. And it gave me the motivation to keep trying and keep going back to DBT and connecting and learning and doing the things. So even though it felt crap that I didn't feel the same way, exactly like what Heather is saying, it made me go, this isn't as horrible as what everybody is telling me it is. There are people out there who are doing okay, and I need to figure out how I get from here to where they are.
And that's kind of the point, right? Like, that's because I remember like Googling it when I got diagnosed and was like, I'm going to die. Nobody's going to love me. Nobody's going to treat me. Wonderful. And then being like, I don't want to, somebody needs to be the face of the fact that that's not what this has to be. And yeah, I've been just reflecting on it so much, which has literally nothing to do with radical acceptance, but thank you for dealing with my weird crisis that I'm going through. Thank you so much for listening to the Superfeeler podcast. This episode was recorded on the traditional and unceded territory of the Matsqui and Sumas First Nations. If you'd like to learn more about the Superfeeler podcast, share your story, or participate in the Superfeelers Club, which is our peer support group, it's totally free, virtual, and open to anyone who experiences intense emotions or has borderline personality disorder, please check out the link in our show notes or go to laurieedmondson.com. If you would like to support the show, we would very much appreciate it. There's an option to do monthly small donations at whatever denomination you'd like, and you get bonus content, extra resources, and extra connection to me throughout. That can be found on patreon.com/superfeeler, or again in the notes below. Thanks again, and have a great day.